I'm excited to debunk 4 more naturalistic theories that people have proposed as better solutions for the facts surrounding the origin of Christianity other than the resurrection of Jesus. So let's get into debunking these 4 naturalistic theories. Number 1, let's begin by debunking the twin theory. The twin theory claims that Jesus secretly had an identical twin brother who was separated from his family at birth. Decades later, after Jesus was crucified, this twin supposedly stole the body of Jesus from Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, injured himself in the exact way that Jesus was wounded, and then fooled everyone, including the disciples, Jesus' own mother Mary, and Jesus' own siblings, into believing that he was the risen Christ. As evidence for this claim, some people point to the Gnostic texts such as the Acts of Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, or Thomas the Contender as sources for this idea. But historians consider these texts as unreliable for this serious historical speculation. Therefore, appealing to these texts does not give the theory much credibility. The scenario itself is wildly implausible. For it to work, the twin would have had to potentially sneak past guards, remove Jesus' body without being caught from the tomb, and inflict on himself brutal wounds, such as deep scourging marks, pierced hands and feet, and a spear wound in the side. He would have also had to have recovered very quickly, or at least quickly enough to show himself to people without being gravely injured to the point of almost dying. Even after the twin endured all of this, he would have still needed to replicate supernatural events which were reported by multiple sources after Jesus resurrected. This would include things such as appearing in a locked room, passing through walls, and performing additional miracles that the risen Jesus performed. Events like those mentioned previously are also mentioned in sources like John chapter 20 verse 30, and they were essential to convincing the disciples and other people. A twin without divine power could have not faked such miracles. For instance, his mother Mary and his siblings would have recognized any differences in things like his voice, mannerisms, knowledge, or personality. Impersonating Jesus would require far more than just looking similar to him. Close friends and family even noticed small differences in people most of the time, and the disciples had spent years with Jesus in close quarters. By the twin theory claiming that Jesus' friends, family, and close disciples all were deceived really stretches the credibility beyond reason for this theory. There is also the problem of historical silence on this matter. There are no credible ancient historians or contemporary sources that record the existence of Jesus' twin brother. Even though the name Thomas means twin, Thomas could have been a twin to anyone. On top of that, the canonical Gospels never attribute Thomas to a twin related to Jesus or Jesus' family. If such a dramatic twin theory or conspiracy had occurred, or even could potentially occur, the Jewish and Roman authorities likely would have tried to say that this happened. If Jesus had a twin brother at all, they still would have likely tried to float this same idea, but they didn't because Jesus didn't have a twin brother as far as we can tell from our earliest sources. Finally, the twin theory does not explain the radical transformation of Jesus' followers. Many disciples were initially skeptical or fearful. As an example, Jesus' brother James did not believe in Jesus during his ministry, but later became a leader in the early church because of an interaction James had with a resurrected Jesus. It seems unreasonable to think that these individuals would abandon their skepticism and risk their lives for what would have been an obvious imposter. The scholar William Lane Craig points out that the twin theory piles on improbable assumptions, such as the idea that the twin may have used makeup or tricks to fake crucifixion wounds and or miracles. These added guesses and the conjecture of the twin existing at all only make the theory less believable and plausible. In the end, the twin theory does not hold up to criticism and has been dismissed by academics all over the political and theological spectrum. Therefore, the twin theory fails. I now want to draw your attention to the combination or hybrid theory. The combination or hybrid theory is when people try to mix several naturalistic explanations together to avoid the resurrection of Jesus. At first glance, this might sound like it strengthens a particular theory or case because they are adding to the possibilities, but in reality it makes an argument even weaker. By combining several weak theories together, that does not create a strong theory. Instead, it multiplies the flaws and inconsistencies of each theory. Even if this new theory covers all of the facts that need to be explained, it doesn't do it justice, and here's why. If one theory already has serious gaps in logic or evidence, combining it with another flawed theory or idea only produces a larger set of contradictions. To put this into perspective, if a theory had a 50% plausibility, which is then combined with another theory that has a 50% plausibility rating, that would mean that the new hybrid theory only has a 25% plausibility. The 50% plausibilities don't add to each other to make 100%, but rather it's 50% of 50%, which lowers the overall credibility of the theory. So if you combine the conspiracy theory with the hallucination theory, that doesn't give you a better theory, it actually gives you a worse theory. Essentially, proponents of the combination theory are gerrymandering together multiple theories to arrive at their explanatory ultimate at the cost of truth. Many of these theories are anachronistic or ad hoc, meaning that they are invented after the fact to try to explain away the resurrection rather than being grounded in evidence at that time. Backers of this type of theory often insert new details or assumptions that are not found in any reliable first-century source. This makes these theories far less credible than they might initially appear. The resurrection, on the other hand, literally comes from our first-century sources. The combination theory also violates the principle of simplicity. In historical reasoning, the simplest explanation that fits the known facts is usually the best one. The resurrection, whether one accepts it or rejects it, is a single, unified explanation that does not require inventing new, unproven details, and it also does not multiply unlikely scenarios. When someone presents one of these combination theories, it's important to remember that simply proposing an alternative to the resurrection does not automatically disprove the resurrection. Many things could have happened, or could have been imagined to happen, but imagination is not evidence. The critical question is not about what could have possibly happened in theory, but what actually happened based on the reliable first-century evidence that we have, from texts and the facts that have occurred. A good way to expose the weaknesses of these hybrid ideas is to ask 3 direct questions. Question number 1. What first-century evidence or document supports this theory? This ensures that there's no generalizations or ad hoc reasoning or things being invented out of whole cloth. If they cannot produce credible historical sources, then the theory lacks a foundation. Second question. Does their combined theory account for all 12 of the well-established facts that most scholars agree upon regarding things such as the death, burial, empty tomb, and post-mortem appearances of Jesus? If the theory fails to address even a few of those historical facts, then it cannot be considered a serious alternative to the resurrection theory. Question number 3. Do they understand that suggesting another theory does not disprove the resurrection? It only shows that they can imagine another possibility, which is not the same as proving it true or even plausible compared to the resurrection. By pointing out these issues, it becomes clear that combining weak naturalistic theories does not solve the problem. Instead, it highlights the weaknesses of each theory and idea, and it shows how a hybrid approach fails and does not stand up to careful historical scrutiny, and that's why the hybrid and combination theories fail. You should also be aware of the hypothesis that grave robbers stole the body of Jesus. The idea that grave robbers stole the body of Jesus is one of the weakest naturalistic theories that we have to date. It does not explain 2 of the most important facts, which are the post-mortem appearances of Jesus to multiple individuals and groups, and the explosive growth of Christianity in the first century. A stolen body cannot account for eyewitnesses claiming to see Jesus alive after his death. Nor does it explain why so many people were willing to suffer persecution and even death in some instances for their conviction that they had interacted with the risen Jesus. The theory is also highly unlikely given the cultural and historical context. In 1st century Jewish society, defiling a grave was considered deeply dishonorable and even offensive. Grave robbing was not a minor offense. Furthermore, Roman authority was involved. There are 1st century sources that indicate that Roman guards may have been posted at the burial place of Jesus, and the tomb itself was sealed by a Roman seal. So this did not necessarily make the tomb more difficult to open, but it shows that this tomb had Roman authority behind it. Breaking this seal would signal open defiance to Rome, which could easily result in a severe punishment or even execution. On top of that, the stone covering the tomb was likely massive, potentially weighing up to 2,000 pounds or more. Moving such a giant stone without being detected would have required several people, which also increases the chances of being caught, not only from the noise that would occur from moving such a stone, but also the more people involved in a secret, the more likely it is for that secret to leak out eventually. What's also interesting is that grave robbers in that period typically targeted tombs for valuable items, such as to steal clothing or burial goods. Yet, according to our earliest sources, the grave clothes of Jesus were left behind. That detail is exactly the opposite of what we would expect if grave robbers robbed Jesus' tomb. The grave robbers would have taken the clothes. There was nothing of value to gain from stealing just his body. A corpse wouldn't really be much worth to ordinary thieves. But if someone somehow knew that the body itself was politically valuable because it could be used to stop the Christian movement, it would have made far more sense to hand that body over to the Jewish authorities for a reward rather than keeping it hidden. If the body was stolen, why wasn't it returned to Jewish authorities for a handsome payment or reward so that the Jews could end the Christian movement? There is also a similar claim where some believe that the gardener may have moved the body of Jesus by mistake, or perhaps maybe wild dogs may have eaten the body of Jesus, and that explains why the body is missing. However, this is based on speculation and late sources. Tertullian, writing in the 3rd century, recounts a story of a gardener moving the body of Jesus because he was worried that people would come and visit Jesus and thus trample his lettuces. This claim is centuries removed from the 1st century accounts that we have in the canonical Gospels, and it's not based on any contemporary evidence. Ironically, the Gospel of John in chapter 20 verse 15 records that Mary Magdalene initially mistook Jesus for a gardener, and she thought that the gardener moved the body of Jesus. But that exact passage shows that she was wrong, and that a gardener didn't move the body, and instead it was Jesus himself who she saw. The fact that John includes this detail actually undermines the later story that a gardener moved the body of Jesus because he was afraid that people would come and visit the tomb and trample his lettuces. You should also be aware that Tertullian himself was not supporting this theory. In his work De Spectaculis, meaning On the Games, Tertullian was actually mocking the arguments of his critics. He referenced 2 main arguments in a portion of his writings, where he is refuting the idea that the disciples stole the body, and he also is refuting the mention of an even more ridiculous claim that the gardener supposedly moved the body of Jesus to protect his lettuce patch. It's also unlikely that any gardener would move the body of Jesus, considering the body of Jesus was laid in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. The tomb belonged to a wealthy and respected member of the Jewish High Council, being Joseph himself. Any gardener working for Joseph on his land would know the importance of leaving the family tomb undisturbed. Furthermore, 1st century sources consistently report that Jesus was placed in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. The reason this is important is because this means Jesus was not thrown into a criminal's graveyard and then eaten by dogs. When all of this evidence is taken together, we can safely dismiss the grave robber theory, or the theory that the gardener moved the body, or the theory that Jesus' body was eaten by dogs because he was thrown in a criminal's grave. None of these theories even accounted for some of the facts surrounding the resurrection of Jesus, including his post-mortem appearances or the rapid growth of Christianity, and it also doesn't explain the transformative effect it had on his disciples. Instead, these are incoherent alternatives, and these suggestions multiply unlikely scenarios and leave the central questions unanswered, and that's why these theories fail. Lastly, let's talk about the alien hypothesis. The alien hypothesis suggests that extraterrestrials either caused the resurrection of Jesus or they stole Jesus' body. This theory shows just how far naturalists will have to go to avoid considering the resurrection theory itself. It seems the only reason that aliens even get mentioned in this context is because of modern culture or today's zeitgeist, which often includes aliens in movies or science fiction. This alien hypothesis seems heavily shaped by current cultural trends and has no connection to first century Jewish or Roman thought. And it shows to what great lengths naturalists will have to go to avoid the conclusion of the resurrection. By contrast, a bodily resurrection of a single individual in history, although surprising, was not borrowed from modern science fiction, but was recorded within a completely different historical setting. In first century Jewish belief, resurrections were understood to occur corporately at the end of time. Although the claim that Jesus rose bodily from the dead as a unique event did not match the expectations of his culture, it is present in our earliest sources. That means it was not something that early Christians would have easily invented, and it fits the recorded statements of Jesus himself. Aliens, on the other hand, are nowhere to be found in any of the earliest sources. Aliens were not a part of the original explanation for the event that took place on Easter morning. Instead, it was the resurrection that was the first explanation. Aliens do not fit the religious or historical context of that time, and they introduce an ad hoc element that adds unnecessary assumptions without evidence. What I find interesting about this theory is that the alien hypothesis still admits that Jesus' body was missing or was risen from the dead. Therefore, in doing so, it concedes many core events that it tries to undermine. Claiming that aliens are more probable than a resurrection also does not solve the problem either, because there is no historical, textual, or cultural basis for inserting aliens into the story. The resurrection hypothesis, by contrast, perfectly matches the claims of Jesus which he made during his life, it reflects the first century sources, and it aligns with the original explanations that the disciples gave for what happened. Therefore, it fits textual sources, the historical context of first century Judaism in many ways, and it is the earliest testimony of the event itself regarding what happened. The resurrection was the original explanation. Aliens are simply not predicted in these sources, and no one at that time even suggested that as an idea. The alien hypothesis is a modern anachronism that we are trying to insert back into first century Judaism. Therefore, the alien hypothesis is not only unsupported by the evidence of the first century, but it's culturally anachronistic and logically inconsistent. It does not provide a serious alternative. Instead, it shows the lengths to which some will go to avoid accepting the explanation that best fits the historical data and the cultural context, which is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is why the alien hypothesis fails. In the end, all four of these naturalistic explanations fail to live up to the facts, reasons, and evidence, which leaves the resurrection of Jesus as the best theory. Remember to press the like button and subscribe for more videos just like this one as we dive deeper into the evidence surrounding the resurrection of Jesus. With that being said, I will see you in the next video.